Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. XBF insists I play a game he assumes he's better at. I complied. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but some background is needed. A few years ago when I was in grad school, I dated a man who was several years older than me who had just finished his master's at the same school, completely different program but both in the realm of STEM, and started a company based on that work. He seemed to have a chip on his shoulder about the fact that he went back to school in his late 20s, and the fact that I was in a PhD program. I need to emphasize I did not think I was better or smarter than him in any way, and I thought and still think he is incredibly smart and his company does fascinating work. But, he still projected this inferiority complex on me, and it was one of many things that soured our relationship. He was obsessed with feeling smarter than me and bringing me down a peg. The relationship ran its course within a year and the breakup was messy, but he insisted on remaining friends despite a lot of obvious tension between us. One day he asked me to help him pick up a moving truck he needed for work and I agreed, but when I got in the car we were kind of quiet for a couple minutes, so I pulled out my phone and finished the Sudoku game I had up in my browser. For some context, I am incredibly good at Sudoku relative to most people. This is because I obsessively solved Sudoku puzzles as a kid and just had big books of them to solve on long bus rides to school, and it's still my go-to game to play while waiting in line, pooping, etc. I don't really correlate this with intelligence, my brain is just trained to recognize the patterns and solving them is soothing. He looked over and saw I was playing and asked what app one played on. I said I just play on a certain website I like, and when he asked why I don't use a Sudoku app, one tried to be as neutral as possible in my response and said that the website had a nice spread of difficulty and that every app one tried had either been all too easy or too hard. Admittedly, it's almost always too easy, but because of aforementioned inferiority complex I was hedging this on purpose. He had a kind of "oh really?" response and insisted I try the app he has on his phone because he was sure I would find it hard. So, I maliciously complied. I opened up the hardest setting of puzzle in his app and solved it in about a minute, beating the record on his phone by at least a minute and a half. I showed it to him and he seemed alarmed and basically said I got lucky. So, I played several more times so that my times flooded the fastest times list until his were all gone. His shock and frustration at this was satisfying on its own, but many months later when I had long forgotten about it, he randomly sent me a screenshot of his puzzle in that app with a faster time, except it was for the easiest puzzle setting. So of course, to be petty, I immediately downloaded the app, played on the easiest setting, beat his time by a significant margin again, and sent a screenshot. Was this mean? Maybe. Was it satisfying? Yes. Next story. Boss did not like the look of the bulk mailing stamp, told me to remove it. Cost the company over $220,000. Back in the 1980s, I worked for a sporting goods company as a catalog designer. Small company, privately owned. I was the entire advertising department. I created 4 catalogs a year. These were responsible for most of our mail order sales, pre-internet, to the tune of around $700,000 a year. We sent the catalogs via bulk mail using a mailing service. This let us send them for a much discounted rate. To do this required the use of a bulk mail permit and placing the permit info on the mailing area of the catalog. Technically it's called a fiche. Enter a new boss, call him Ron. I was number 1, the only one, in my department. For some reason the company owner hired Ron as a favor to a friend. From day one he was micromanaging, questioning everything, and screwing up my very tight schedule. This was before computers were common. Everything was by hand. Literally typing out copy and reducing it on a photocopier to fit. Developing the photo film myself, making prints, etc. The actual printer had to add screens to the photos so they'd print, burn metal plates, and so on. All time consuming and expensive. Deadlines could not be missed. So I was stuck with several 16-hour days come crunch time. I was complaining to the owner, but he really couldn't care less. I really wanted to stick it to Ron and the opportunity presented itself. Constant threats of "my way or you're fired" were getting to me. The latest pre-summer catalog was done. Summer was our big season. I had to give him my mock-up, photocopied sheets stapled together, of the final catalog for his approval, a new step added after he demanded it. He looked at it and sent it back with several pointless revisions. And a note to remove that ugly permit box because it was not needed. Where he worked previously stuffed their mailers in envelopes, the envelopes had the fiche, but their mailer did this last step. I simply asked him to initial the changes as this was the final approved version and was going to the printer the next day. There was no time to check it again. So he did. I knew it would be a total mess, and it's something I would have done in the past. 50,000 catalogs printed and shipped directly to the mailer. The day they arrive at the mailer, the boss gets a call from the sales rep. "We can't mail your catalogs." Boss storms into my area of the building and is literally screaming. Ron is now pissed and yelling at me, joined by the boss. I swear, spittle and froth, vein bulging, screaming. Minimum 2-week delay, wasted money, lost sales. I explain what happened, the threat to fire me, and showed the owner the changes to the final copy. Initialed by Ron. He was going to give Ron a second chance until the bill came in from the printer. They had to stamp 50,000 catalogs by hand. We had to rent their permit, since that's what was on their stamp. Rental and labor was almost $8,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's $20,000. Plus our early summer sales boost was off by almost $50,000 from previous years. Or $200,000 adjusted for inflation. Ron was fired. I was left alone after that. Next story. Promote me but won't bump up my hourly wage? Sure thing, I'll just use your rules to give myself a 50% pay bump. This happened in a company I worked at over a decade ago. I was a technician working on large machines. We had numerous clients and were assigned to a given site. The site I worked on was across a border, so I couldn't live near it, and had an hour commute each way every day. I got no expenses or mileage for this because it was my assigned site. After working for this company for a while, I got promoted to stop doing routine maintenance and work on more complex projects. Most of these projects were on a site near where I lived, so that suited me just fine. However, the company told me they didn't have any budget to increase my wage, which is where the malicious compliance came in. I combed through their rules and regs as well as my contract, and found that if you had to travel to a site that was not your assigned one, you got paid as if you had driven from your assigned site to whatever other one you were working on. My assigned site was classified as being 1.5 hours from the site that I was doing most of my work on, so I was allowed to claim those 1.5 hours as hours worked on my timesheet. So every day I would put down 1.5 hours commute there, 1.5 hours commute home, and 8 hours regular work. Anything over 8 hours worked a day was paid at OT rates, so for those 3 hours commute I was getting paid 4.5 hours. Because my contract said my assigned site was Site A, and I was mostly working at Site B, there was nothing they could do about it, and my country has pretty decent employee protections, so I'd have had to agree to a contract change, which I obviously was not going to. They told me numerous times they were going to change my assigned site, but until the day I quit they were never able to. The length of my commute most days was 10 to 15 minutes each way. Next story. You only pay mileage for the shortest possible trip? Okay, then you have to pay my tolls. At my job, every day I have to travel between 2 offices. I start at my main office, then have to travel to the second office, then back to my main office. Because I'm using my personal vehicle for this travel, the company pays me mileage. Well, there are basically 2 routes you can take between the 2 offices. One is about a mile round trip shorter, but has tolls. So I always took the 1 mile longer route and avoid the tolls. I did it this way for a year. Well, in comes the new bookkeeper and she is hellbent on saving the company money. And where does she think all this wasteful money is going? Expense reports, obviously. So she starts nitpicking every report. Like if someone is out and has to buy some pens for work. She goes online and finds the cheapest price possible for those pens, and only reimburses for that cheaper price. It, obviously, has pissed several people off. Well, she eventually decided to target me. I submit my report for 2 weeks, and a few days later get the reimbursement payment. Well, it's $5.85 short. I ask her about it, and she says I've been ripping off the company for the past year by taking the longer route between the offices. She will only pay mileage for the shorter route from now on. And I'm lucky she doesn't go back and take back all the extra from the past year. I say okay, but to please send me that per her I must take the shorter route and that this is company policy and leave her office. Before I even made it to my desk, I had the email from her confirming what she said. 2 weeks later, I submit my expense report. I reported the shorter route, so the company saved $5.85. But tolls added up to $136. A net loss for the company of $130.15. It's been 6 months and I'm still taking the shorter route, costing the company an extra $130.15 every 2 weeks. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.